Allison, an uptick in unemployment is leading to accusations from both sides of the political aisle about who's to blame for the sluggish rate of economic recovery. So, are we lagging behind where we should be post-2008? Joining us now is Michael Shank. He is Vice President of U.S. Operations at the Institute for Economics and Peace, a nonpartisan, nonprofit research group. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Big questions right there. Let me the first one, the unemployment numbers Friday, bad numbers. Everyone knows that. Is that likely a hiccup, or is that some indication that things are slowing down or not where we thought they were in terms of a recovery?
Bernanke has already warned that we might have a second recession, so we should be prepared for that. But here's the problem with the obsession of those numbers. 69,000 jobs, 8.2% unemployment. There's a much bigger issue that's not being addressed. 15% unemployed, underemployed, or permanently departed from the workforce. We should focus on that. But even bigger than that, if they were to focus on that, that would be a good trend. But even bigger than that, according to a census survey just in the last 6 months, we've got 1 out of every 2 Americans living in poverty or low income. So that's 50 million in poverty, 100 million in low income. We need to address that. Past, present, and future policies are only going to exacerbate that trend. We have the highest poverty, highest inequality rates since World War II, Great Depression. Let's talk about that. Past policies that have exacerbated, bipartisan, Republican, Democrats, both doing it. Tax policy, capital gains favoring the rich. So that's non-labor income that's being taxed at 10 to 15%. Trade policy, we've outsourced everything. The only way to reverse that trend is to really focus on Make It in America, maybe a green economy. And then third, in terms of wage labor policy, our minimum wage now is lower, of course adjusted for inflation, than it was in the late 60s. So for much of working class America, the minimum wage has stagnated for the last 40 years. Until we address those policies, and that's, again, Republican and Democrat responsible for that, we're going to see the gap grow bigger, likelihood of new recession. Present regulation.
I just want to point out, your group is a nonpartisan group, but everything that you're saying now, very near and dear to your heart and your group's heart, which is the need to address these things on a more macro scale.
That's right.
But let me ask you this. Does our political, the White House, the Congress, whatever, do they lack the political will to deal with these things on that scale?
I think all of Congress and the administration, whether it's Obama, whether it will be Romney this November, lack the political will. And here's a couple other things where they're lacking the political will. On regulation, in terms of regulating the banks, the too big to fail. Dodd-Frank, it's not being employed. Only a third of the rules of Dodd-Frank have actually been implemented. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, very weak. Congress tried to kind of demasculate it, undermine its power. Volcker rule not in place like it should be, which is why we saw J.P. Morgan losing $2 billion. We need those rules in place to regulate the financial industry. But also in the housing crisis, you're seeing the banks returning to subprime. You're seeing them foreclosing at a faster rate. They got slapped on the wrist with $25 billion. That's not sufficient. Going forward, you're seeing Romney. You're also seeing Scott Walker in Wisconsin call for austerity budgets. The problem with austerity budgets, it cuts at the very programs that will likely increase the violence in that state. So Ohio, Wisconsin, Florida, all states that have pushed for austerity in the last couple of years, those are states that in our U.S. Peace Index, where we rank states by their level of peacefulness or conversely by their level of violence, you see a correlation. More peaceful states have higher education, higher health insurance, lower poverty, lower inequality, better access to basic services, higher labor participation rate.
So it may be a short-sighted solution.
Right.
But some of these politicians feel like, well, we got to do something. We can't just keep spending and spending and spending.
Without question. The cuts are in the wrong place, though, because if they cut education and health, it increases the likelihood that they'll have more violence in the state, and then that violence will cost. Homicide costs, violent crime costs, incarceration costs. Where they should cut, tax loopholes for corporations. GE, Pepco had negative tax rates in the 40 to 50% in the last year, so they paid nothing come tax time, and actually they got returns. Certainly in some other areas like defense spending, we could cut down too. So without question, we need to cut. They're just cutting in the wrong ways.
All right, Michael Shank, we could go on with this discussion for a lot longer. We'll have to have you back to talk about it a little bit more. Thanks very much for coming in.
Thanks, Tony.
Michael Shank with the Institute for Economics and Peace.